Hi, I'm Teacher Luke, and welcome to English Story Ready. This is a place where you can learn English naturally through stories on a bunch of different topics. Today's one is particularly interesting. I really hope you enjoy it. If you do me a favor, leave a heart emoji in the comments to let me know. Okay, well, let's get right to today's story. Hi, I'm Teacher Luke, and I'm back with another story for you. Today, we're focusing on memory. Have you ever met someone who can remember everything? I have, and I am always jealous of these people. That's why today's story is so important, because remembering more can improve your life greatly. So let's get started. I hope you enjoy this story. Chapter 1: How Memory Works. Before we start, let me ask you two quick questions. How often do you forget something important? Like where you left your keys or what you were about to say? And what's one thing you really want to remember better? Maybe new English words or a friend's birthday? Take a moment to think about your answers. If you're listening on YouTube or in a podcast app, you can write them in the comments below. All right, let's begin. Have you ever wondered what memory actually is? Most people think of memory as a kind of storage box in the brain, a place where we put things we want to keep and take them out when we need them. But memory isn't a box, it's a process, a living, changing system that helps us make sense of the world. When you remember something, your brain isn't just opening a drawer and pulling out a file. It's rebuilding that memory from many different pieces: images, sounds, emotions, and ideas. Every time you remember, your brain recreates the experience, a bit like an artist repainting a picture from memory. That's why memories can change. Sometimes small details disappear or new ones are added. You might remember a conversation slightly differently each time you think about it. This doesn't mean your brain is broken, it means your memory is alive. The 3 stages of memory. Scientists often describe memory as having 3 main stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Let's take a closer look at each one. Encoding is the process of taking in new information. It happens when you experience something for the first time, like hearing a new English word or meeting someone new. Your brain decides what to pay attention to. If something feels important, interesting, or emotional, your brain marks it as worth remembering. For example, madness osniju to kwishna swaksen. Imagine you meet a new person at a party. If they tell a funny story or remind you of someone you like, your brain pays attention, and that increases the chance you'll remember their name later. But if your attention is divided or you're looking at your phone while they introduce themselves, your brain probably won't bother storing that information deeply. That's why attention is the first key to memory. The second stage is storage. This is where the brain keeps information over time. But storage doesn't mean the memory just sits quietly somewhere. It's constantly changing. Your brain strengthens certain connections when you use them often and lets others fade if they're not used. That's why practice and repetition are so powerful. Every time you review a word, a name, or a concept, you're telling your brain, hey, this is still important. Don't forget it. Finally, there's retrieval, the moment you try to remember something. Retrieval is like unlocking a door. Sometimes it opens easily. Sometimes it's stuck. Have you ever had that feeling where you can almost remember something? It's right on the tip of your tongue? That's a retrieval problem. The memory is there, but you can't quite reach it. Usually, after a few minutes or even hours, it suddenly comes back. That's because the brain found a new path to the information. Short-term and long-term memory. Now, let's talk about 2 main types of memory: short-term and long-term. Short-term memory is like your brain's notepad. It holds information for a few seconds or minutes, just long enough for you to use it. For example, when someone gives you a phone number, you repeat it in your head for a few moments until you write it down. After that, unless you use it again, it disappears. Long-term memory, on the other hand, is your library. It holds everything you've learned and experienced. Your skills, your childhood memories, your favorite songs, your English vocabulary, and more. But to move something from short-term to long-term memory, you need attention, emotion, or repetition. Think about a song you love. You don't have to study the lyrics, you just listen to it many times and feel something while you do. Emotion and repetition work together to make it unforgettable. Why we forget. Forgetting is a natural part of memory. It's not a failure. In fact, your brain is designed to forget most things. If it didn't, you'd be overwhelmed by every detail of every day. There are a few main reasons why we forget. One is decay. Memories fade when we don't use them. Another is interference. New information pushes out old information. And sometimes we just fail to retrieve a memory. It's there, but the path to it is blocked. Imagine your brain like a city full of roads. When you first learn something, the road is new, rough, and hard to travel. But the more you use it, by reviewing or practicing, the smoother it becomes. If you stop using it, plants grow over it, and eventually it's hard to find again. That's why reviewing and revisiting information at regular intervals helps you remember more. It keeps the road clear. The power of emotion. Have you noticed that emotional memories last longer? You probably remember where you were when something very exciting or very sad happened. That's because emotion tells the brain, "This matters, save it." The part of the brain called the amygdala helps connect emotion to memory. When you feel something strongly, the amygdala becomes active and strengthens the connections between brain cells. That's why combining emotion with learning through stories, music, or personal experiences helps you remember more. For example, if you learn a new word like courage and you connect it to a movie scene that moved you deeply, you'll never forget it. Repetition and connection. Let's return to repetition. You've probably heard the phrase, "practice makes perfect." Well, in memory, practice makes permanent. But repetition doesn't have to be boring. The best kind of repetition is meaningful repetition, when you see or use information in different ways. For example, let's say you're learning the word opportunity. You could write it in a sentence, hear it in a podcast, say it aloud in conversation, connect it to a personal memory. I had an opportunity to study abroad. Each time you use the word, you're building a new connection. Your brain doesn't just remember the word, it remembers how it feels, when you used it, and why it mattered. The more connections you make, the stronger the memory becomes. Sleep and memory. Here's something many people forget. Your memory works even when you're asleep. During sleep, especially deep sleep and REM sleep, your brain organizes and strengthens memories. It decides what to keep and what to let go of. That's why a good night's sleep after studying is one of the most effective memory tools you can use. If you study late and then go straight to bed, your brain keeps working in the background, sorting the information you learned. But if you skip sleep, your brain doesn't get that chance. So next time you're preparing for an exam, remember, rest is part of learning. Memory tricks and techniques. Let's finish with a few powerful memory strategies. Visualization. Turn information into images. For example, if you want to remember the word bridge, imagine a real bridge in your mind, maybe one you've crossed before. The more detailed and colorful the image, the better. Chunking. Break big pieces of information into smaller parts. That's how we remember phone numbers, 079-246-3901. it's easier to remember three small groups than one long number. Association. Link new information to something you already know. If you learn the word generous, connect it to a generous friend. Personal meaning makes memory stronger. Spaced repetition. Review information at increasing intervals. After 1 day, then 3 days, then a week, then 2 weeks. This technique keeps your memory active without wasting time. Teach someone else. When you explain something to another person, you organize the information clearly in your own mind. Teaching is one of the fastest ways to remember. Bringing it all together. So, how does memory work? It starts when we pay attention, when something catches our interest or emotion. Then our brain encodes it, stores it, and later retrieves it when we need it. Memory is not just a record of the past. It's the foundation of who we are and how we learn. Every skill, every word, every story you remember shapes the way you see the world. And the best part? You can train it. Your memory is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Before we end this chapter, let me ask you one last question. What's one memory technique you want to try this week? Visualization? Spaced repetition? Maybe teaching someone else? Write your answer in the comments below. I'd love to see what you choose. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to remember English words faster, using powerful techniques that connect science, emotion, and creativity. Until then, keep learning, keep remembering, and keep your brain alive. Chapter 2. The 3 stages: encoding, storage, retrieval. Before we begin, here's a quick question for you. When you try to remember something new, like a word in English or the name of someone you've just met, what usually happens? Do you remember it easily, or does it disappear from your mind after a few minutes? Think about your answer for a moment. If you're listening on YouTube or in a podcast app, write it in the comments below. All right, let's begin. In the previous chapter, we learned that memory isn't a single thing. It's not a box in your brain where you store everything you've seen or heard. Memory is a process, a series of steps your brain follows every time you experience something new. Those steps are called encoding, storage, and retrieval. Together, they create the full memory process, how information enters your mind, how it stays there, and how you bring it back when you need it. Let's explore each stage one by one. Stage 1. Encoding, turning experience into information. Imagine you walk into a bakery. The smell of fresh bread fills the air. You see golden croissants behind the glass, hear quiet music, and feel the warmth of the oven. At that moment, your brain is doing something amazing. It's encoding the experience. Encoding is the process of turning what you see, hear, or feel into signals your brain can store. It's like translating the world into your brain's language. Every time you experience something new, your senses send information to the brain. But here's the secret. Not everything gets encoded. Your brain is always deciding what's worth remembering and what can be ignored. You experience thousands of things every minute: sounds, colors, smells, movements. But you only notice a few. Your brain focuses on what seems important, surprising, emotional, or useful. That's why attention is the first key to memory. If you're distracted or bored, your brain won't encode the experience deeply. Think about learning English vocabulary. If you study a list of words while checking your phone, your brain doesn't pay full attention. But if you create a fun sentence, imagine a picture, or laugh at a funny example, your brain says, "Wait, this matters," and encodes it more strongly. There are also different types of encoding. Visual encoding, when you remember what something looks like. Auditory encoding, when you remember what something sounds like. Semantic encoding, when you remember the meaning of something. Of these, semantic encoding is the most powerful. When you understand the meaning of a new word or idea, you remember it far longer than if you just repeat the sound. For example, you might hear the English word journey. If you only repeat it 5 times, you might forget it tomorrow. But if you connect it to your own life, my journey to London was exciting. You've created meaning, and meaning makes memory stronger. So, remember, the more meaningful and emotional something feels, the better your brain encodes it. Stage 2, storage, keeping information in the brain. Once information is encoded, it moves to the next stage, storage. This is where the brain keeps memories over time, sometimes for seconds, sometimes for a lifetime. But storage isn't like saving a file on a computer. Your brain doesn't store each memory in one place. Instead, it spreads the memory across many areas. The sound, the image, the emotion, and the meaning are all stored in different regions and connected by neural pathways. Think of storage like building a web of connections. Every time you review something, say an English word, you make the web stronger. If you stop using it, the connections weaken, and eventually the web breaks. Scientists describe storage in terms of short-term memory and long-term memory. Short-term memory holds small amounts of information for a few seconds or minutes. It's like the working space in your brain. For example, when you read a sentence in English, you keep the first few words in short-term memory so you can understand the whole sentence. But if you don't repeat or use that information, it disappears quickly. Long-term memory, on the other hand, is where knowledge stays for days, months, or years. Your birthday, your favorite food, how to ride a bike, these are all stored in long-term memory. The most fascinating part is how short-term memories become long-term ones. That process is called consolidation, and it often happens during sleep. When you sleep, your brain organizes the day's information, strengthens important connections, and clears out the rest. So, getting enough sleep isn't just good for your body, it's essential for your memory. Here's something else to remember. Your brain loves patterns and repetition. If you want to move something from short-term to long-term storage, you need to revisit it several times. That's why spaced repetition, reviewing information at increasing intervals, is so powerful. For example, if you learn a new phrase like take it easy, review it today, then again in 2 days, then after a week. Each review tells your brain this is still important. Keep it safe. Stage 3, retrieval, bringing memories back. Now we come to the third stage, retrieval. This is when you try to remember something that's already stored. Retrieval is like opening a book you've read before. You might not remember every word, but certain parts come back easily. The main idea, the images, the emotions. When retrieval works well, memories feel clear and automatic. But sometimes, it's hard. You know the information is there, but you can't reach it. That's called the tip of the tongue experience. You can almost remember, but not quite. So, what helps retrieval? First, cues. A cue is a piece of information that helps you find the memory. For example, smelling a certain perfume might remind you of a person you haven't seen in years. Or hearing a song might bring back memories of a vacation. In learning, cues are also essential. If you study words with pictures, stories, or examples, those become cues that help you recall the meaning later. That's why using context when learning is much better than memorizing words in isolation. Second, retrieval works best when the situation matches how you learned. If you study in a quiet room, you'll remember best in a quiet test room. If you learn while listening to music, you might recall it better when the same music plays again. This is called context-dependent memory. Third, the more you practice retrieval, the stronger it becomes. Every time you test yourself or try to explain something from memory, you're not just checking what you know, you're training your brain to remember faster. That's why testing is more powerful than rereading notes. It's like exercising your memory muscle. How the three stages work together. Now let's connect all three stages. Imagine you're studying for an English exam. You see a new word, achievement. During encoding, your brain pays attention to the word. You say it aloud, understand its meaning, and maybe connect it to a personal goal. My biggest achievement was passing my driving test. During storage, you review the word again the next day, write it in a sentence, and use it in conversation. Each time, you strengthen the neural connections. During retrieval, you're taking the test. You see a question that includes the word achievement, and you recall the meaning easily because your brain has practiced finding it before. All three stages work together: attention to encode, repetition to store, and recall to retrieve. If one stage is weak, the memory doesn't last. For example, if you don't focus, poor encoding, you won't store the memory properly. If you don't review, poor storage, it fades away. And if you never practice recalling it, poor retrieval, it stays hidden, unused. To remember more effectively, you need to strengthen all three. Simple tips to improve each stage. Let's finish with some simple, science-backed tips you can start using today. To improve encoding, focus your attention, remove distractions, make information meaningful, connect it to your life. Use pictures, sounds, or emotions to make it more memorable. To improve storage, review information regularly using spaced repetition. Sleep well, your brain strengthens memories during rest. Mix new and old information together. This helps the brain build networks. To improve retrieval, test yourself often. Say the answer aloud before checking it. Use cues, stories, songs, or personal examples. Don't worry if you forget at first. Every time you try to remember, even if you fail, you make the memory stronger. Bringing it all together. So, what have we learned? Memory isn't magic. It's a process with three stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding decides what information enters your brain. Storage keeps it safe over time. Retrieval lets you bring it back when you need it. Together, these stages shape everything you learn, remember, and understand. And the best part? You can train each one. By focusing your attention, reviewing regularly, and testing yourself often, you can build a stronger, more reliable memory. Before we finish, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which of the three stages, encoding, storage, or retrieval, do you think is hardest for you? Write your answer in the comments below. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into encoding, how to train your brain to pay attention, make learning meaningful, and remember faster. Until then, take a break, get some sleep, and let your brain do its quiet, magical work. Chapter 3: How English Learners Can Use This Knowledge. Let's start with a simple question. When you study English, what do you find hardest to remember? Is it new vocabulary, grammar rules, or maybe listening phrases that disappear as soon as you hear them? Take a second to think about your answer. If you're listening on YouTube or in a podcast app, write it in the comments below. All right, let's get started. In the last chapter, we talked about the three stages of memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Now it's time to take that science and make it useful for you, an English learner, because understanding how memory works is only half the story. The real power comes from using that knowledge to study smarter, not harder. Let's explore how you can apply what you've learned to remember more English. faster, easier, and for longer. 1. Encoding, how to pay attention and learn deeply. The first stage of memory is encoding, how you take in information. For English learners, this is where everything begins. When you learn a new word or phrase, your brain must decide, is this important enough to keep? If your answer is yes, your brain starts building a connection. But if you're distracted, tired, or bored, your brain doesn't encode it well, and it soon disappears. So, how can you improve encoding? Let's look at 3 ways. A. Learn with meaning, not just repetition. Many students try to memorize word lists by repeating them again and again. It feels productive, but most of the time, those words fade quickly. Instead, you need to connect meaning to what you learn. Ask yourself questions like, when would I use this word in my life? What example can I make with this word? What image or story does it remind me of? For example, if you learn the word challenge, don't just say it 10 times. Think, learning English is a challenge, but it's also exciting. Now, that word has emotion and context. Your brain marks it as meaningful, and it becomes much easier to remember. B. Use all your senses. Your memory is stronger when more of your senses are involved. When you read a word, say it aloud. When you listen to a new phrase, write it down. When you study grammar, use colors or mind maps to visualize it. Every sense you use, seeing, hearing, touching, speaking, adds another path to the same memory. So later, when you try to remember it, your brain has more ways to find it again. If you use a study app or notebook, make it colorful, alive, and interactive. Think of your brain as a team of sensors. Each one helps the others remember. C. Learn emotionally. Emotion is the glue that helps memories stick. When you feel something while you learn, surprise, curiosity, laughter, or pride, your brain says, this matters. That's why stories, songs, and real conversations are so powerful for learning English. They make you feel, not just think. So next time you study, don't just read dry examples from a textbook. Watch a short video, listen to a podcast, or imagine a real-life situation. If the learning moment connects to your emotions, it will stay with you much longer. 2. Storage. How to keep English in your brain. Once your brain has encoded a word or idea, the next challenge is storage. How to keep that information over time. And this is where most learners struggle. You might learn 10 new words today, but next week you only remember 3. Why? Because your brain deletes what it thinks is unimportant. The good news is you can train it not to. Here's how. A. Review smartly, not constantly. Repetition works, but only if you space it out. This method is called spaced repetition, and it's one of the most effective ways to keep information in long-term memory. Here's how to use it. Review new words after 1 day. Review again after 3 days, then after a week, then 2 weeks, and finally a month. Each review tells your brain this is still important. You don't need to spend hours. Just 5 minutes of focused review can make a big difference. There are even apps that do this automatically, like Anki or Quizlet, but you can also do it with flashcards or a notebook. The key is timing, not just effort. B. Sleep to strengthen memory. Here's something many learners forget. Memory grows while you sleep. When you study English during the day, your brain collects information, but it doesn't fully organize it yet. At night, while you sleep, your brain sorts through everything, deciding what to keep and what to throw away. If you stay up late cramming vocabulary, your brain doesn't get enough time to consolidate those memories. But if you sleep well, it strengthens what you learned and clears space for new information. So, one of the best study habits you can develop is simple: study early, sleep well. C. Mix old and new learning. Have you ever reviewed something and it suddenly felt too easy? That's a sign it's time to mix it with new material. When you combine old and new information, like reviewing grammar while learning new words, your brain builds stronger networks. This technique is called interleaving. For example, instead of studying only vocabulary for 1 hour, try mixing 20 minutes of reading, 20 minutes of speaking, and 20 minutes of grammar review. You'll keep your brain active and make storage more flexible. 3. Retrieval: how to remember on demand. Now let's talk about the third stage, retrieval or remembering on demand. This is what happens when you try to recall a word, answer a question, or use English in conversation. Many learners say, "I know the word, but I can't remember it when I speak." That's a retrieval problem, not a knowledge problem. Here's the good news: retrieval is a skill. You can train it just like a muscle. A. Test yourself often. Testing isn't just for exams, it's a learning tool. When you test yourself, you're practicing retrieval. For example, instead of reading your notes again, close the book and try to recall what you learned. Say it aloud. What were the 3 stages of memory again? Encoding, storage, retrieval. Every time you do this, your brain becomes faster and more confident at finding the information. So don't just review, quiz yourself. That's how real learning happens. B. Use cues and context. Retrieval becomes easier when you have strong cues, clues that guide your brain back to the memory. When learning new words, don't study them alone. Use them in full sentences with context and emotion. For example, instead of memorizing generous equals giving, say, "My grandmother is generous because she always helps others." Now you have an image, a feeling, and a personal connection, all of which help you retrieve the word later. You can also group words by topic, like travel, food, or work. When you think of one word, it naturally leads to others in the same group. That's how your brain builds a strong memory network. C. Speak and write from memory. The best way to practice retrieval is to use your English. When you speak or write, you're constantly recalling words and structures from memory. That's why active learning, conversation, journaling, storytelling is so powerful. Even short speaking practice every day, like describing your morning or explaining what you learned, helps. Each time you pull information from your brain, the path becomes clearer. If you're shy about speaking, record yourself or talk to an AI chat partner. You don't need an audience, you just need to practice remembering. 4. Combining all 3 stages. Now that you understand the 3 stages, encoding, storage, and retrieval, let's see how they work together for an English learner. Imagine you want to remember the phrase "break the ice" to start a friendly conversation. Encoding: you learn it by watching a movie scene where 2 people meet for the first time. You laugh, you understand the meaning, and you write your own example. "I told a joke to break the ice at my new job." Storage: you review the phrase a few days later, use it in conversation, and hear it again in another movie. Your brain connects those experiences and strengthens the memory. Retrieval: later, when you're chatting with someone new, the phrase pops into your mind naturally. You say, "Let's break the ice," and it feels easy. That's the power of using all 3 stages. You're not just memorizing, you're building the memory from experience, emotion, and use. 5. The mindset that makes it all work. There's one more piece of the puzzle: your mindset. Many learners believe memory is fixed. You either have a good memory or a bad memory. But that's not true. Memory is flexible. It grows with practice, just like a muscle. If you forget something today, it doesn't mean you're bad at learning. It means your brain needs more practice connecting the dots. Be patient with yourself. Every review, every practice, every mistake is part of the process. Each time you try to remember, even if you fail, you're building stronger connections. So celebrate the small wins: the word you remembered in conversation, the phrase you understood in a movie, the grammar rule that finally made sense. Each one is a sign that your memory and your English is growing. Bringing it all together. So, how can English learners use this knowledge? By understanding that learning a language isn't just about studying, it's about working with your brain. Focus deeply when you study. Encoding. Review regularly and sleep well. Storage. Test yourself and use your English often. Retrieval. When all three stages work together, you won't just learn English, you'll remember it. You'll start thinking in English naturally because the words and structures live comfortably in your memory. Before we finish, I'd love to know, which of the three stages do you think you need to improve the most? Encoding, storage, or retrieval? Write your answer in the comments below. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into practical memory techniques for learning English faster, including visualization, storytelling, and spaced review strategies you can start using today. Until then, study smart, rest well, and remember, your memory is not a limit. It's your greatest learning tool.